I was in the midst of preparing to move, as our brand new house had just been completed. It was on a day when I got off work early, so I decided to stop by the new place before heading home. To my surprise, I found my unemployed husband, who was supposed to be out job hunting, in the throes of an affair with another woman.
How about kicking her out and living here together?
Really? I'm so happy. But how do you plan to kick out your wife?
I was dumbstruck by the turn of events. However, I wasn't about to let things go their way. I switched gears and called over my husband's relatives. "This is the new house." I introduced them to the scene where my husband was caught in a semi-nude embrace with his mistress, both frozen as they saw us. My father-in-law was furious. After a chase ensued with my husband trying to escape, he took an unbelievable action, leading to an unexpected conclusion. Ever since I was young, owning my dream home was my goal. I started saving from my part-time job earnings during my student days, working tirelessly to make this dream a reality. Even after landing a job post-college, I was all about work, putting romance on the back burner. Around the time I turned 30, I met my husband, who also dreamed of owning our own home. We hit it off and agreeing if we work together, we can make our dream come true sooner. We dated for about a year before getting married. Initially, we lived in a rented apartment, but after 5 years, the time to realize our dream had finally arrived. As I grew older, my vague childhood dream of homeownership developed into a vision with specific ideals. My grandparents and parents had always lived in rentals. While it wasn't too inconvenient, the need for permission for everything was a hassle. My parents seemed okay with it, saying, "Home is where you make it," but the longer I lived in rentals, the more I wanted to improve things. I became convinced that owning a home was the only way to have the freedom to renovate as I wished. When I shared these thoughts and preferences with the home builder, they suggested, "Wouldn't you prefer to have someone from your own generation, perhaps a woman, as your contact?" And that's how we were introduced to our current representative. She was beautiful, even in my eyes, but humble and a great listener, answering my questions clearly and precisely. I felt very comfortable and trusted her completely. However, my husband often praised her excessively, to the point where it was off-putting. My suspicion towards his behavior grew as his praises became more frequent. The woman, however, seemed to tactfully ignore my husband's over-the-top compliments, which made me feel almost guilty. Ultimately, incorporating all our ideals led to significantly exceeding our initial budget. The monthly mortgage payments were going to be high. While compromising was an option, I thought it better to earn more rather than settle and later regret. I earned more than my husband, and most of our ideals were mine, so I decided to bear the extra costs, especially since a promotion was on the horizon, ensuring an increase in my income. Given the promotion was on the table, it was a sure thing that my income would increase. I didn't mind going over budget and asked them to proceed as planned. When we decided to get married, we discussed and set our priorities as a couple. Top of the list was owning our dream home. We agreed to compromise as little as possible to get a house close to both our ideals. We both wanted to work until the mortgage was fully paid off. And as for kids, which naturally becomes a topic of concern once you tie the knot, we decided to discuss it if either of us felt the desire for them. Essentially, we were open to a child-free marriage. That's why I didn't mind allocating most of our earnings towards our home. However, the rules we set would eventually break down. After my promotion was confirmed, I threw myself into work even more. I had fewer days off due to handing over responsibilities to my subordinates, and sometimes even working on weekends to keep up. My husband finishes work on time, with no overtime or work on holidays. He had quite a bit of free time. Therefore, he started handling more of the new home details. While we usually met with our sales rep at her office as the completion of our new home neared, she began visiting our current home frequently under the guise of meetings. "Did you have another meeting with the sales rep at our house today? Why can't you go to their company instead?" I asked him more about, "What did you talk about, and is everything going smoothly?" He would vaguely reply, "Just some details and stuff," unwilling to share more. I wanted to ask my husband, "What do you mean by various things? Tell me about these various things," but since I had been too busy and had left everything about our new home to him, I felt a sense of guilt for leaving it all up to him and couldn't pursue the matter deeply. The reason was, he said, "If you're that concerned, then you take responsibility." If he had just left it at that, it would have been over. However, as I kept silent out of fear, eventually, an unexpected situation occurred. Without consulting me, my husband quit his job. One day, when the completion of our dream home was just around the corner, I asked my husband, who was still lounging around at home when it was time for me to leave for work, "Are you sure you're okay with the time?"
Work. I quit. It's inconvenient to commute from our new place, and with your salary increase, we can manage for now, right?
He didn't even seem to feel guilty, insisting he was right with a smirk on his face. Inconvenient to commute? We thoroughly considered that when choosing the location. Remember, you were the one who said it was fine that only local trains stopped there and that a bit of a walk to the station was good for our health. When he responded with, "Did I say that?" I snapped and yelled back, "Enough already." We had gone over budget, counting on his income as well. After all, we were supposed to work together to afford our dream home. Why has it suddenly become just my income? Even if you decided to quit, I wish you had talked to me about it first. After I had finished saying everything I wanted to say, driven by my emotions, my husband asked, "Is it really something to get so angry about?" showing that he completely failed to grasp the seriousness of the matter. Seeing that my anger hadn't subsided, my husband promised, "I'll find a new job within 2 months after we move." So I made him swear to keep his promise, and with that, the matter was concluded. However, far from disappearing, my mistrust only grew more and more. In the meantime, our long-awaited new home was completed. I had a penchant for custom-made and imported furniture, so we decided to move in only after everything was set up. My husband said he wanted to find a job with an easy commute from our new home and was seen walking to the nearest station now and then. But finding a new job for him was not going as planned. He spent his weekdays at the job center and was hardly at home. Seeing my husband's demeanor, I believed he was doing his best to look for a job in his own way. Rather than pushing him into a short-lived job, I figured it would be better to aim for a position where he could work until retirement. I decided to be a bit more patient and see how things would pan out, keeping the promise in mind. On one of those days, as usual, I found myself having to work on what was supposed to be my day off. As I was hurriedly getting ready, my husband said, "I'll take care of the chores." Grateful, I thanked him and left for work. I was concerned because he insisted on hurrying, But thanks to my husband taking over all the hectic morning chores, I was able to leave for work with time to spare. Because of this, I unusually managed to finish my work just after noon. I thought about just going home and resting, but my husband, who took over the chores, was probably relaxing then, and I didn't want to disturb him. So I decided to put it off and went to our new place to pick out the curtains that we had been delaying, as I hadn't measured some of the smaller windows yet. My husband had already shared his relaxing experiences at the new place, which I had yet to enjoy myself. Thinking it might be nice to have a late lunch there, I bought some snacks at the station and arrived at the new home. As I tried to unlock the door, I found it strangely unlocked. What does this mean? My anxiety grew. I considered calling the police, but then remembered I had installed something recently. After noticing signs of someone entering our new home before, my brand new dresser, which my husband wasn't supposed to use, was dirty. Knowing that my husband had occasionally been to our new place, I asked him about it, but he said he never brought anyone over. So assuming it might be thieves scouting the place or a hangout spot for troublemakers, I had installed a surveillance camera for evidence in case of an incident. Whether it's thieves or troublemakers, I realized I couldn't handle it alone, so I thought it would be best to have evidence to show the police in case something happened. With trembling hands, I took a deep breath to calm myself. After taking a moment to regain composure, I held my phone again and checked the camera footage. To my shock, it wasn't a thief or troublemakers, but my husband in the midst of a passionate affair with a woman who was not me. Connecting his odd behavior and changes in personality over time, I felt everything clicked. The betrayal of having believed he was looking for a job, only to find out otherwise, brought more disbelief than shock. Looking back, his inexplicable actions made sense now. The traces of an intruder were likely from the woman he brought over. The problem was who this woman was. Considering he abruptly quit his job, I suspected she might be a subordinate. Although her face was initially hidden from the camera, a change in their position eventually revealed her face briefly. Zooming in on her face for a better look, I recognized her as the saleswoman from the home builder. The betrayal hit me hard. I had empathized with and trusted her work ethic. They both betrayed me. Did she betray me without hesitation, knowing that I trusted her as a saleswoman? Or had my husband persuaded her despite her reluctance? No, it could be the other way around. Could they have been smirking behind my back, thinking they had successfully deceived me? It's infuriating. As my shock gradually turned into anger, I saved the video. I decided to keep watching to see how far these two, convinced they had fooled me, would go. My husband was showing a side to this woman that he had never shown to me, completely engrossed in their act. I felt nothing but contempt for the sordid scene. The woman was loud, not holding back in the slightest. Once they seemed satisfied, my husband began to suggest, "Let's live together in this house." Hearing this, I wondered if he had already made arrangements to leave me. I was not about to let him get the upper hand. I would be the one to confront him with divorce. That right belonged to me. Convinced of this, I called my in-laws and rushed to the nearby home improvement store. I bought a bunch of tension rods and used them to block all the windows and doors on the first floor. I thought they would notice the sound when I set up the tension rods around the house, but it seems they got carried away while I was at the home center. The two of them, now even more caught up in their passionate affair than before, were completely oblivious to my presence and the noises from outside. Once I had finished securing the entrances with the tension rods, ensuring the two inside couldn't get out, my in-laws arrived. I had called them over with the excuse that I wanted to show off our new house on short notice. They had been interested in our home since its construction phase and arrived promptly despite the sudden invitation. They were excited to see the exterior. Although they said, "I want to see the interior soon," I revealed the real reason why I had called them both here. I couldn't bring myself to say, "My husband is currently in the midst of an intense affair," so I showed them the surveillance footage I had saved. My mother-in-law's expression was indescribable upon seeing her son in action. It must be unsettling for a mother to see her child in such a primal state. While it's not unusual for an adult man to be intimate with a woman, it's another thing to witness your son in that context, especially when the other party is his mistress. My father-in-law, a man himself, was already shaking with anger. It seemed like more than the act of being physically intimate with someone other than his wife. What was truly unforgivable to my father-in-law is the fact that a married man was having an affair. My mother-in-law, with a mix of embarrassment and anger, turned beet red and apologized to me sincerely. My father-in-law looked like he wanted to punch his foolish son right then and there, with anger seeping through every pore. He kept apologizing to me, but you could tell from his clenched fists that were so tight as if blood might seep out, that he was trying to contain his rage. They apologized again, and they were determined to stop that ludicrous behavior immediately, removing a security bar and storming into the house. By the time they barged in, my husband and his mistress had just finished their second round of intense lovemaking and seemed to be basking in the afterglow. My husband was just getting out of bed and putting on his underwear when his parents suddenly appeared, freezing him in his tracks. Next, the woman screamed and hurriedly put on the nearest clothes she could find, which, while better than being naked, still looked indecent. Hearing the woman scream snapped my husband back to reality, and he quickly finished putting on his pants, repeating why. Perhaps it's because no other words come to his mind besides that. I couldn't help but laugh at the sight of them. The woman tried to escape through the window but couldn't since it was secured from the outside with tension rods. She was hysterically yelling, "What's going on here?" My husband rushed out to barricade himself on the second floor, taking advantage of the moment when my in-laws were chasing after him, and dashed upstairs. Surprisingly, my father-in-law's legs were strong, and before my husband and the woman could barricade themselves in the second floor room, he forcefully pushed open the door and entered. Come to think of it, I remember hearing that my father-in-law dedicated his youth to track and field during his student days. He still seems to run for the sake of his health. In contrast, my husband is someone who doesn't exercise at all. I thought for sure my in-laws had won, but the stubborn pair retreated into an adjacent walk-in closet, locking themselves inside.
Will you cut it out already? If you're going to run away, you shouldn't be cheating.
Why did you do this? Aren't you ashamed? Come out.
My in-laws, from behind the door, were berating my husband, saying, "Come out, shameless," and giving him a lecture. "This is the last straw. I'm filing for divorce, and you'll be hearing from our lawyers about the settlement." Then the woman said, "Didn't you say we weren't going to be caught?" and blamed my husband. My husband declared, "We'll talk about that later. Right now, let's just get out of here." He wasn't giving up on the escape plan. The woman refused, fearing injury from jumping out of a second-story window. It seemed like my husband was trying to convince them, saying things like, "Is it okay if I pay compensation?" In the end, it looked like both of them jumped out of the second-floor window. As we heard a dull thud and looked outside from the second-floor room, we saw them crouching on the ground. When I went downstairs and stepped outside, both of them were saying, "Ouch, it hurts." The woman's leg was bent at an odd angle. My in-laws said, "They brought this on themselves. Leave them be." But out of a final act of mercy, I decided to call an ambulance. However, my husband was shirtless, and the woman was in nothing but underwear, covered only by my husband's shirt, presenting a scandalous sight. It was quite a sight watching how I explained the situation to the paramedics who rushed over. I watched discreetly as the two of them kept yelling, "It hurts, do something," without being able to answer any of the paramedics' questions. Given their attire, the paramedics could probably guess what had happened. Later, I visited my husband's hospital room with my lawyer and in-laws to discuss the divorce and settlement. After the incident, the hospital had contacted me. They had informed me that my husband got injured and was taken to the ER. I was told to bring his insurance card, but I did not do so. Instead, my in-laws went on my behalf and left the necessary documents at the reception before returning. It seemed they were not willing to look after my husband anymore. When I visited my husband's room, he waved at me with a smile, thinking he was forgiven. But then my in-laws appeared, and a stranger, pushing the mistress in a wheelchair, entered from another room. This stranger introduced himself as my lawyer and handed over his business card, freezing my husband's smile solid. It finally dawned on him that he wasn't forgiven. I can't help but be astounded by how hopelessly naive my husband is. How could he possibly think he would be forgiven after everything he's done? The lawyer straightforwardly informed them of the necessities, advising my husband to agree to the divorce. I informed him that even if he refused and it went to court, my stance would not change. The lawyer strongly explained the potential consequences of the case going to court, such as the negative impact on my husband's social credibility and his ability to find employment. My husband quietly responded, "I agree to the divorce." When the discussion moved on to the topic of the settlement, he also agreed to it willingly. As for the mistress, she appeared to have completely lost her will, exhibiting an attitude of indifference towards everything. My husband seemed somewhat dissatisfied, but under the stern gaze of his parents, he reluctantly agreed. Everything proceeded smoothly, for which I am grateful. Next, I demanded that my husband take responsibility for the furniture we had bought together and the new house. I told him he would also have to cover the down payment and the remaining mortgage. My father-in-law, not allowing any objections, intimidated him, but my husband didn't want to take responsibility for the house, protesting despite his fear of my father-in-law's glare.
That's ridiculous. Most of the interior design was your choice. My preferences were minimal, so why should I bear all the costs? That's unjust.
I didn't want to give up a house filled with my dreams either. I showed my husband the surveillance camera footage I had saved, because he made it come to this. "How can you think I'd calmly live in a place where you brought your mistress and acted indecently? How rotten is your brain?" To my cry mixed with anger and despair, the lawyer said, "We have no intention of losing even a penny, so let's fight this to the end." My mother-in-law collapsed to her knees, crying, "I never knew you were such a heartless, good-for-nothing child.
After all this, will you make not only your wife but also your mother cry? Just accept it without any more fuss.
It seemed my husband was unable to stand up to my father-in-law, ultimately being completely overwhelmed by a single remark from him. He said he would follow everything exactly as the lawyer suggested. Just as I thought everything was settled, an elderly couple, presumably in their 60s, entered my husband's hospital room. They were surprised to see my in-laws. Without concern for the onlookers, they suddenly knelt before my in-laws, uttering apologies. The words of the kneeling couple included apologies such as, "Our daughter has done something terribly rude, and we apologize for causing injury to your son this time." It seemed the mistress's parents came to visit but were looking for their daughter, who wasn't in her hospital room. It appears they were surprised to finally find the parents they intended to apologize to. However, something seemed off about my parents-in-law's reaction. There appeared to be another layer of anger, separate from the outrage towards the parents of the woman involved in the affair.
I thought it was some burglar cat, but it turns out it was your daughter.
Since my husband's affair came to light, my father-in-law seemed to be constantly irritated and furiously angry. However, his anger now is incomparable to any anger he's shown before. When I asked my mother-in-law what's going on, she explained that the parents of my husband's mistress were running a company that was subcontracted for my father-in-law's company. The company run by the mistress's parents was lax in their work, often missing deadlines and delivering poor quality, leading to numerous complaints. Despite repeated warnings, there was no improvement, so my father-in-law had mentioned ending their business relationship. However, if they were abandoned by my father-in-law's company, their subcontracting firm would quickly become unsustainable and go bankrupt. They begged not to be abandoned for the sake of a few employees' livelihoods. Faced with the welfare of the hired staff, my father-in-law, being a CEO himself, felt he couldn't simply cut them off. Under the condition that if another problem arose, they would be dropped, he had continued to give them work out of conditional compassion.
Remember the promise. I said there would be no next time. We will never do business with your company again.
With that declaration from my father-in-law, the mistress's parents forced their daughter, despite her caste, into a kneeling position. To their daughter, who struggled to kneel properly due to her caste, they demanded, "Your future depends on this, a fraction is nothing. Kneel properly and apologize." My father-in-law declared, "No apology will change my decision." While the mistress's parents pleaded, "Please somehow make an exception." The mistress was forcibly made to kneel by her parents, crying out, "It hurts, it's going to break again." A nurse rushed in upon hearing the commotion, separating the mistress and her parents. The nurse scolded them, "What are you doing to an injured person?" The mistress's parents made the scene even bigger by yelling, "Our livelihood is at stake, leave us alone." The situation escalated beyond the nurse's control, requiring security to intervene and eventually remove the mistress and her parents from my husband's hospital room. I wondered if it was their irresponsible upbringing that enabled the mistress to brazenly have an affair with a married man. I thought that while watching the behavior of the mistress's parents. By being in that hospital, I was likely to run into the mistress's parents again, and there might also be trouble regarding my father-in-law's company. Wanting to avoid such situations, I vowed never to return to that hospital again. I informed my husband that I would no longer speak to him directly and that all future communications should be through our lawyers before leaving the hospital. Later, I heard some updates from my in-laws. It seemed like the mistress's parents, facing the cessation of their business dealings due to her affair with the son of a client company, have disowned their daughter. They hadn't visited her in the hospital since the day of the incident. My ex-husband was discharged from the hospital sooner than the mistress due to his less severe injuries. He wanted to return to his parents' home until he found a job, but my father-in-law refused to allow it. Consequently, my ex-husband started living in the new house. The mistress, having nowhere else to go, moved in after her discharge. It seemed they were living together not out of love but out of necessity, sharing the expensive new house as temporary roommates until they could find somewhere else to live. The mistress had intended to find her own place immediately after discharge, but she was greeted with termination upon her return to work. Apparently, the company had wanted to fire her sooner but had to wait until she was fully recovered, as they couldn't terminate an employee undergoing medical treatment. The reason for the termination was due to inappropriate involvement with a client, causing issues. Caught off guard by the unexpected firing, the mistress apparently had no choice but to rely on my ex-husband. Both of them have ended up unemployed, but despite sharing the goal of finding jobs, saving money, and moving out, they keep quarreling and can't seem to save the necessary amount due to constant bickering. Although both want to quickly save money and sell their expensive new home, they seem to be constantly fighting, each blaming the other for their situation. My ex-husband is having a hard time with mortgage payments, and his debt is increasing to the point of being unmanageable. There are rumors of suspicious individuals loitering around their new house, likely keeping an eye on them. It seems my ex-husband may have gotten involved with some dangerous lenders. After the divorce, I received a substantial amount of money from the settlement. As planned, I got promoted, so as a reward to myself, I decided to build a house filled with all my dreams. Having long admired Scandinavian interior design, I found a store that specialized in it and imagined building a house that would complement the furniture I discovered there. The happiest moments are when I'm immersed in the vision of my ideal home in my mind. This time, I vow to realize my dream without any interference from anyone.